The radio crackled with desperation at 3:47 hours. Viper 6, this is Reaper 11. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions on the ridge line. Request immediate close air support, over. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Marcus Kane, and anyone who knew Kane understood that if he was calling for help, the situation had moved far beyond critical. 3 miles above the Hindu Kush Mountains, Captain Raven Ghost Blackthorn felt her. Thunderbolt II respond to her gentle touch on the stick. The twin General Electric TF-34 engines hummed their familiar death song as she banked toward the coordinates. Below, in a valley that had swallowed too many good soldiers, 12 Navy SEALs were pinned down by an estimated 40 Taliban fighters who had turned the ridge into a fortress of overlapping kill zones. Reaper 11, Ghost inbound your position, 2 minutes out. Describe your tactical situation. Raven's voice cut through the static with the calm precision that had earned her both respect and skepticism throughout her 8-year career. At 29, she was the youngest pilot ever assigned to the 354th Fighter Squadron, and the only woman currently flying A-10s in active combat operations. Kane's response came between the sharp cracks of AK-47 fire. Ghost, we've got fighters in fortified positions along the entire ridge, approximately 800 meters northeast of our position. We're taking fire from at least 6 different locations. Can you see the smoke? Raven's eyes scanned the terrain below, her training taking over as she identified the telltale signs of a well-coordinated ambush. The SEALs had been moving through what appeared to be a safe valley when the mountains erupted with muzzle flashes. Now they were trapped in a depression that offered minimal cover, with enemies positioned on high ground in a perfect horseshoe formation. I have visual on your position, Reaper. I see the smoke, and I count multiple muzzle flashes along the ridge. Stand by for gun run. Raven's fingers moved across her weapon systems with practiced efficiency, selecting her 13 GAU-8 Avenger cannon. The 7-barrel rotary cannon was capable of firing 3,900 rounds per minute, each depleted uranium round designed to punch through armor like paper. But this wasn't about numbers or firepower. Down there, 12 men were fighting for their lives against impossible odds, and they were counting on her to be perfect. No pressure, she thought grimly, remembering the words of her first instructor. In the A-10, you don't get style points. You get dead SEALs or live ones. The ridge line stretched before her like a jagged scar against the morning sky, and somewhere in those rocks, enemies were drawing beads on American soldiers. Raven pushed the throttles forward and dove toward the sound of gunfire, knowing that the next few minutes would either save lives or add to the growing list of failures that haunted her dreams. The sky held its breath, waiting for thunder. The Taliban fighters on Ridge 247 had chosen their position with predatory intelligence. The limestone outcropping provided natural fortification while offering commanding views of 3 valley approaches. For 6 months, coalition forces had avoided this area, but intelligence suggested a high-value target was moving through the region. The SEALs had drawn the short straw. Now, as dawn painted the mountains in shades of amber and crimson, the hunters had become the hunted. Kane pressed himself against a boulder, feeling the sting of rock fragments as bullets chipped away at his cover. To his left, Petty Officer Rodriguez was applying pressure to Seaman Chen's shoulder wound, their movements quick and efficient despite the chaos erupting around them. "Ghost, this is Reaper 11," Kane transmitted, his voice strained but controlled. "We need you to focus on the northern section of the ridge first. We've got a heavy machine gun position there that's keeping us pinned." 3,000 feet above, Raven rolled her aircraft into a shallow dive, her eyes locked onto the muzzle flashes that flickered like deadly fireflies against the rocky face. The A-10's heads-up display painted targeting solutions across her field of vision, but her instincts were already calculating angles, wind speed, and the precise moment when devastation would rain from the sky. "Copy that, Reaper. Northern Ridge heavy machine gun, danger close." Kane's laugh was bitter. Ghost, if you're not danger close, you're not close enough. We're combat ineffective without immediate support. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Combat ineffective meant the mission was blown, but more importantly, it meant American soldiers were about to die. Raven had heard those words twice before in her career, and both times she had watched good men come home in flag-draped coffins because close air support arrived 30 seconds too late. Not today, not on her watch. She could see them now through her targeting pod, 12 figures scattered among the rocks like broken toys, their movements desperate and increasingly erratic as ammunition ran low. The Taliban fighters were methodically advancing, using coordinated fire and movement to close the distance. It was textbook asymmetric warfare, and it was working. Raven's hands moved across her controls with the fluid precision of a concert pianist, adjusting her approach angle to maximize the effectiveness of her gun run while minimizing the risk of friendly fire. The GAU-8 cannon was accurate, but at 2,000 feet and 300 knots, there was no room for error. Reaper 1-1, Ghost is in hot 30 seconds. Mark your position with smoke if you can. Below, Kane pulled a purple smoke grenade from his kit and hurled it toward their perimeter. The wind caught the smoke and dragged it east, creating a thin line between the SEALs and their attackers. The A-10 screamed overhead like an avenging angel, its distinctive twin engines creating a sound that had become synonymous with salvation for ground troops throughout 2 decades of war. Thunder was coming to the mountains, and it wore the wings of a woman they called Ghost. The first gun run shattered the morning silence with the distinctive BRRRT of the GAU-8 cannon. Raven's targeting reticle tracked across the northern section of the ridge as depleted uranium rounds chewed through limestone and flesh with equal efficiency. The heavy machine gun position disappeared in a cloud of pulverized rock and smoke, its crew silenced forever. Beautiful, Kane's voice crackled through the radio with the first hint of hope he'd felt in 20 minutes. Ghost, that was right on target. We're seeing movement along the eastern face now. Looks like they're trying to flank us. Raven pulled her aircraft into a climbing left turn, her eyes already scanning for new threats. The A-10 responded to her inputs with the sluggish reliability of a flying tank, its titanium bathtub cockpit protecting her from ground fire, while the twin engines provided enough power to carry an incredible weapons load. "I see them," she transmitted, watching through her targeting pod as muzzle flashes erupted from new positions. The Taliban fighters were adapting quickly, dispersing to minimize the effectiveness of airstrikes while maintaining pressure on the surrounded SEALs. It was smart tactical thinking that spoke to professional training rather than hastily organized resistance. Below, the SEALs were using the brief reprieve to redistribute ammunition and treat wounded. Rodriguez had Chen stabilized, but the kid had lost blood and needed immediate medical attention. 2 other team members were showing signs of combat fatigue, their movements becoming slower and less coordinated as adrenaline gave way to exhaustion. "Ghost, we've got wounded down here," Kane transmitted. "How long can you stay on station?" Raven glanced at her fuel gauge and weapons status. She was carrying a full load of 30 ammunition, but her fuel situation would limit her to perhaps 20 minutes of continuous air support. After that, she would need to return to base or find a tanker for aerial refueling. "Reaper, I've got 20 mics of playtime, then I'll need to cycle out. There's another hog 15 minutes behind me." She didn't mention that the other A-10 was being flown by Captain Derek Morrison, whose idea of close air support was anything within 50 meters of friendly forces. The SEALs needed precision, not enthusiasm. "Copy that, Ghost. We'll make it work." But even as Kane spoke, new muzzle flashes appeared along the southern ridge. The Taliban were bringing reinforcements, and the noose was tightening. Raven counted at least 12 new fighting positions, each one carefully positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that would turn the valley floor into a killing ground. She rolled inverted and pulled through into another attack run, this time targeting the eastern flanking positions. The A-10's cannon spoke again, its depleted uranium rounds carving through rock and steel with surgical precision. Two more fighting positions went silent, but for every position she eliminated, two more seemed to appear. The mathematics of combat were working against them. 12 SEALs with limited ammunition against an estimated 60 Taliban fighters, with the advantages of high ground, prepared positions, and interior lines of communication. Raven keyed her radio to the command frequency. Overlord, this is Ghost. I need additional air support at grid 347,829. We've got troops in contact, immediate assistance required. The response came immediately. Ghost Overlord, negative on additional air support. All assets are committed to Operation Steel Rain. You are alone on this one. Alone. The word echoed in Raven's headset as she began her next attack run, knowing that 12 American lives depended on her skill, her judgment, and her ability to make every round count. The eastern slope erupted under Raven's guns, limestone and steel fragments creating a deadly hail that scattered the Taliban fighters like leaves in a hurricane. But for every position she destroyed, another muzzle flash appeared somewhere else along the ridge. The enemy commander was rotating his fighters, using the terrain to maximum advantage while slowly tightening the noose around the trapped SEALs. Ghost, this is Reaper 1-1. Kane's voice carried new urgency. We're down to our last magazines down here. How many more runs can you make? Raven checked her ammunition counter. 847 rounds remaining. At her current rate of fire, perhaps 3 more effective gun runs, maybe 4 if she was conservative. But conservation meant longer exposure times for the SEALs, and they were already taking casualties. Reaper, I've got enough for a few more dance numbers, but we need to talk about extraction. This position is not tenable. Kane's bitter laugh cut through the radio static. Copy that, Ghost. But unless you've got a magic helicopter hiding in your back pocket, we're staying put until relief arrives. Relief that was still 3 hours away, minimum. Raven had monitored the command frequencies during her approach. The nearest quick reaction force was dealing with their own situation 40 kilometers south, and the region's helicopter assets were committed to a medical evacuation in another sector. The SEALs were on their own, with only one A-10 and a pilot who had something to prove standing between them, and a very unpleasant end to their military careers. Raven rolled into another attack run, this time targeting a cluster of fighters who were attempting to establish a new heavy weapons position on the southern face of the ridge. Her targeting pod showed at least 6 individuals moving equipment and ammunition, their movements coordinated and professional. The GAU-8 cannon thundered again, its distinctive sound echoing off the mountain walls like the voice of an angry god. The heavy weapons team disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris, but Raven's celebration was short-lived. Her threat warning receiver lit up like a Christmas tree, indicating that someone down there had just acquired her with a surface-to-air missile system. Shit, she muttered, braking hard left and deploying chaff and flares. The SA-7 missile that lanced up from the ridge passed harmlessly through her countermeasures, but the message was clear. The Taliban had brought more than small arms to this fight. Reaper, be advised I'm taking SAM fire. These guys came prepared for an air battle. Kane's response was immediate. Ghost, we saw the launch. North side of the ridge, approximately halfway up. If you can take out that missile team, we might be able to break out of here. Might was the operative word. Even without the SAM threat, the SEALs were outnumbered 5-1 and running dangerously low on ammunition. Any movement from their defensive positions would expose them to withering fire from multiple directions. But staying put meant certain death, and everyone involved knew it. Raven armed her remaining Maverick missiles and began hunting for the SAM team, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether 12 American soldiers went home to their families or became another tragic footnote in the war's endless catalog of heroic last stands. Time was running out, and the mountains were growing hungry for blood. The Maverick missile streaked down from the sky like a guided lightning bolt, its infrared seeker locked onto the heat signature of the A-7 launcher. The explosion carved a crater in the limestone ridge, sending shockwaves through the mountain that rattled windows in villages 10 miles away. When the smoke cleared, the missile team was gone, reduced to organic matter scattered across 50 meters of scorched rock. Outstanding! Kane's voice carried genuine excitement for the first time since the engagement began. Ghost, that was beautiful work. We're seeing Taliban fighters pulling back from the northern positions. Raven allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as she watched enemy combatants retreating through her targeting pod. But her celebration was premature. New movement along the ridge indicated that the Taliban commander was reorganizing his forces, consolidating them into more defensible positions while maintaining fire superiority. Don't get comfortable down there, Reaper. They're not running, they're repositioning. As if to emphasize her point, a fresh volley of rifle fire erupted from the eastern face, forcing the SEALs deeper into cover. Two more team members were showing signs of heat exhaustion, and their water supplies were running critically low. The Afghan sun was climbing toward its noon zenith, and the temperature in the valley was approaching 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Kane wiped sweat from his eyes and keyed his radio. "Ghost, we need to discuss extraction options. We can't hold this position much longer." Raven studied the tactical situation through her pod, her mind running through possibilities and calculating odds. The nearest suitable landing zone for helicopters was 3 kilometers north, across open ground that would expose the SEALs to fire from multiple directions. Without suppression, it would be suicide. But staying put was also suicide, just slower. Reaper 1-1, what's your assessment of team mobility? Can you move under fire? Kane looked around at his men, taking inventory of their condition and capabilities. Chen was stable but would need assistance. Rodriguez had taken shrapnel in his leg and was limping badly. The others were tired but still combat effective, though their ammunition situation was becoming desperate. "Ghost, we can move, but we'll need continuous suppression. These guys have us zeroed from multiple positions." Continuous suppression meant burning through her remaining ammunition quickly, leaving nothing in reserve for the inevitable counterattacks. It was a gamble that would either save 12 lives or waste the last opportunity to provide meaningful support. Raven made her decision with the cold calculation that separated professional warriors from weekend enthusiasts. "Reaper, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make 3 consecutive gun runs along the ridge line, walking my fire from north to south. On my third pass, you move. Head north toward the bend in the valley. There's a wadi that will give you some concealment." Kane studied the terrain, his tactical mind already calculating routes and timing. It was risky, but risk was relative when the alternative was certain death. "Copy that, Ghost. We'll be ready to move on your signal." Raven rolled her A-10 into the first of 3 attack runs that would either be remembered as a masterpiece of close air support or as the prelude to a very bad day. The first gun run was poetry written in depleted uranium and high explosives. Raven's GAU-8 cannon carved a path of destruction along the northern ridge, systematically eliminating fighting positions with surgical precision. Taliban fighters scattered like startled insects, their carefully planned ambush dissolving under the relentless hammer of American air power. "Moving?" Kane's voice cut through the radio as 12 SEALs broke from cover, their movements coordinated despite exhaustion and wounds. Rodriguez leaned heavily on Chen, who was fighting through blood loss and shock to keep pace with his team. Every step was agony, but forward movement meant life. The second gun run shifted to the eastern face, where Raven's targeting pod had identified a cluster of fighters trying to re-establish firing positions. The A-10's cannon spoke with mechanical precision, each burst eliminating threats with the efficiency of an industrial-grade hole punch. But ammunition was running low. Raven's counter showed less than 200 rounds remaining, barely enough for one more effective gun run. After that, she would be reduced to making intimidating passes, while hopping the psychological effect would be enough to keep the Taliban suppressed. Halfway there, Kane reported between labored breaths. The SEALs were making good time across the valley floor, using every bit of available cover while Raven's suppressive fire kept enemy heads down. But she could see new movement through her targeting pod. Taliban fighters were flanking around the southern ridge, trying to intercept the escaping Americans. Reaper, you've got movement coming around the south end of the ridge. Estimate 12 to 15 fighters, moving to intercept your route. Kane's response was immediate. Copy that, Ghost. Can you service that target? Raven studied her ammunition display and calculated angles. One more gun run, maybe 90 seconds of suppressive fire, and then she would be Winchester, out of ammunition and effectively useless except as a very expensive observation platform. Reaper 1-1, this is my last pass. After this, I'm Winchester and you're on your own until the cavalry arrives. The weight of those words settled over both pilot and ground team like a funeral shroud. When Raven's ammunition ran out, 12 American soldiers would be alone in hostile territory, with an unknown number of Taliban fighters converging on their position. But for now, they still had an Angel overhead, and that Angel had enough depleted uranium left to buy them perhaps 90 more seconds of life. Raven rolled into her final attack run, knowing that every round had to count, and that perfection was the minimum acceptable standard. Below her, 12 men were running for their lives, and their survival depended entirely on her ability to place devastating fire exactly where it was needed most. The GAU-8 cannon thundered one last time, its voice echoing off the mountains like the death song of mechanical gods. When the gun fell silent and the last empty shell casing tumbled toward the valley floor, Raven Blackthorn would either be a hero or a witness to tragedy. The final gun run was magnificent in its violence. Raven's last 180 rounds found their targets with the precision of a surgical instrument, each burst eliminating Taliban fighters who had positioned themselves to intercept the fleeing SEALs. Bodies tumbled down the rocky slope like broken dolls as depleted uranium rounds carved through flesh and bone with indifferent efficiency. Winchester, Winchester, Raven called out, the universal code for out of ammunition. Below her, the SEALs were still moving, their pace steady despite exhaustion and wounds. They had covered nearly 2 kilometers under her protective fire, but they still had another kilometer to reach the relative safety of the Wadi system. Kane's voice crackled through the radio, steady despite the circumstances. Copy Winchester, Ghost. Thanks for the dance. We'll take it from here. But taking it from here meant facing an unknown number of Taliban fighters with dwindling ammunition and no air support. Raven watched through her targeting pod as enemy combatants began emerging from concealed positions, their movements cautious but determined. They knew the American aircraft was out of ammunition, and they were regrouping for a final push. Reaper, I'm seeing movement all along your flanks. Estimate 20 to 30 fighters converging on your position. The mathematics were brutal. 12 exhausted SEALs with minimal ammunition against 30 Taliban fighters on familiar terrain. Even elite warriors had limitations, and those limitations were about to be tested against overwhelming odds. Kane studied the tactical situation with the calm professionalism that had kept him alive through 4 combat deployments. His men were tired, hurt, and running low on everything that mattered in a firefight. But they were SEALs, and SEALs didn't quit until their hearts stopped beating. Ghost, what's your fuel situation? Can you stay on station? Raven checked her fuel gauge with growing concern. She had perhaps 10 minutes of loiter time before she would need to depart for base or risk flameout over enemy territory. 10 minutes to watch 12 good men fight their last battle against impossible odds. Reaper, I've got maybe 10 mics before I have to cycle out. The other hog is still 15 out. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. The Taliban fighters were moving with coordinated precision, using the terrain to mask their approach while establishing overlapping fields of fire. When they struck, it would be with overwhelming force concentrated at the point of maximum vulnerability. Kane made his decision with the cold pragmatism that separated leaders from followers. Ghost, when you have to leave, you leave. We'll handle things down here. But handling things meant dying well, and everyone involved understood the unspoken subtext. The SEALs would sell their lives as expensively as possible, but mathematics and ammunition shortages would ultimately determine the outcome. Raven remained overhead, her empty cannon a reminder of limitations and the finite nature of heroism. She could see the Taliban fighters moving through her targeting pod, their advance methodical and professional. In 8 minutes, she would have to abandon 12 American soldiers to their fate. The thought sat in her stomach like a lead weight, heavy with implications and regret. Time was running out, and there was nothing left to shoot. The radio crackled with an unexpected voice. Ghost, this is Reaper 1-2, inbound your position with a full combat load. ETA 6 minutes. Captain Derek Morrison's voice cut through the static like salvation, wrapped in jet fuel and high explosives. Raven had never been happier to hear the cocky pilot's distinctive drawl, even though his aggressive flying style made her nervous under normal circumstances. Reaper 1-2 Ghost, outstanding to hear your voice. 12 SEALs on the ground, surrounded and low on ammunition. I'm Winchester and low on fuel. Morrison's A-10 appeared on the horizon like a mechanical prayer answered, its distinctive profile unmistakable against the morning sky. The aircraft carried a full weapons load, 1,150 rounds of 30 ammunition, AGM-65 Maverick missiles, and enough attitude to level a small city. Kane's voice carried new hope. Ghost, Reaper 1-1, did someone just say we've got more air support inbound? Affirmative, Reaper. Your backup has arrived with bells on. But 6 minutes was an eternity in combat time. The Taliban fighters were within 200 meters of the SEALs' position, moving through a maze of boulders and dry creek beds that provided excellent concealment. Without suppressive fire, they would overrun the American position before Morrison could engage effectively. Raven made a decision that violated every regulation in the flight manual. Instead of departing for base to refuel, she would remain on station and provide what support she could with an empty gun and sheer audacity. Reaper 1-2, this is Ghost. I'm staying on station to provide overwatch until you arrive. Morrison's response was immediate. Ghost, negative. Your Winchester and low on fuel, RTB immediately. Negative, Reaper 1-2. I've got 12 Americans down there who need every advantage they can get. It was insubordination of the highest order, but Raven didn't care about regulations or career implications. Below her, 12 men were preparing to make their last stand, and she would be damned if she would abandon them to face overwhelming odds alone. Kane's voice cut through their argument. Ghost, whatever you're planning, you better do it fast. We've got movement on 3 sides and they're getting close. The Taliban fighters were indeed closing in, their advance coordinated and professional. Raven could see them through her targeting pod, dark figures moving between rocks with the fluid grace of experienced warriors. They knew the American aircraft was out of ammunition, and they were pressing their advantage with tactical precision. But they didn't know about the pilot's willingness to improvise when conventional weapons failed. Raven rolled her A-10 into a shallow dive. Her empty cannon pointed directly at the advancing Taliban fighters. She had no ammunition, but she had 29,000 pounds of aircraft traveling at 300 miles per hour, and sometimes psychological warfare was more effective than high explosives. The A-10 screamed overhead at 50 feet, its twin engines creating a sound like the end of the world. Taliban fighters dove for cover as the massive aircraft roared past, its presence a reminder that death could arrive from the sky without warning. Reaper 1-1, this is Ghost making show of force passes until the cavalry arrives. Keep your heads down and make every shot count. It was an empty gesture with an empty gun, but sometimes empty gestures bought precious seconds, and seconds could mean the difference between life and death for 12 American warriors fighting against impossible odds. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio with new urgency. "Ghost, I'm 3 minutes out. Keep those bastards honest until I get there." 3 minutes. Raven could make perhaps 6 more passes before her fuel situation became critical, each pass a calculated risk that served no purpose other than keeping enemy heads down and American hopes alive. Below her, 12 SEALs prepared for the fight of their lives, while overhead, a pilot with an empty gun prepared to prove that sometimes courage mattered more than ammunition. The psychological impact of Raven's show of force passes was immediate and dramatic. Taliban fighters who had been advancing with confidence suddenly found themselves diving for cover every 30 seconds as 29,000 pounds of American aircraft thundered overhead at treetop level. Even though they knew the A-10 was out of ammunition, the primal fear of death from above overrode tactical thinking. Kane used the reprieve to redistribute his team's remaining ammunition and establish better defensive positions among the rocks. Each man had perhaps 2 magazines left, enough for a brief firefight, but not enough for an extended engagement against superior numbers. Reaper 1-1, this is Ghost. I can see approximately 25 fighters in your immediate area, with more moving up from the south. They're being cautious because of my presence, but that won't last long. Indeed, several Taliban commanders were already shouting orders, trying to maintain momentum despite the psychological pressure from above. Professional warriors could overcome fear when properly led, and these fighters had proven their professionalism throughout the engagement. Morrison's voice cut through the radio with blessed precision. "Ghost, Reaper 1-2 is 30 seconds out. I have visual on smoke and multiple muzzle flashes. Request immediate tactical update." Reaper 1-2 Ghost. Friendlies are marked with purple smoke in the northern section of the valley. Hostiles are advancing from 3 directions: east, south, and west. Estimate 25 to 30 combatants total, small arms and light machine guns. Morrison's A-10 appeared over the southern ridge like an avenging angel, its full weapons load making it significantly heavier and less maneuverable than Raven's stripped-down aircraft. But maneuverability was less important than firepower when facing infantry in the open. I have visual on friendlies and hostiles. Ghost, clear the area for immediate gun run. Raven pulled her aircraft into a climbing turn, her fuel gauge showing dangerously low levels but her heart soaring with relief. Morrison might be aggressive to the point of recklessness, but he was also one of the most accurate pilots in the squadron when it came to close air support. The GAU-8 cannon on Morrison's aircraft thundered to life, its depleted uranium rounds carving through the Taliban formation with industrial efficiency. Bodies disappeared in clouds of pink mist and pulverized rock as the 7-barrel rotary cannon cycled through its deadly music. "Beautiful," Kane's voice carried pure joy as enemy combatants scattered under the devastating fire. "Reaper 1-2, that was right on target. We're seeing multiple KIA and the rest are pulling back." But the Taliban weren't retreating, they were adapting. Morrison's gun run had eliminated nearly a dozen fighters, but the survivors were using the terrain to mask their positions while maintaining pressure on the SEALs. These weren't untrained insurgents. They were professional soldiers who understood combined arms tactics and fire discipline. Ghost, this is Reaper 1-2. Your fuel situation. Raven checked her gauge with growing concern. Reaper 1-2, I'm at bingo fuel. Need to RTB immediately or I'll be walking home. Morrison's response was immediate. Roger, Ghost, thanks for keeping the bastards honest. I've got it from here. As Raven turned her aircraft toward base, she could hear Morrison's cannon thundering again, its distinctive sound echoing off the mountain walls like mechanical thunder. The SEALs were saved, but the battle was far from over. 12 American warriors and one determined pilot had held the line against impossible odds, proving once again that courage and skill could overcome superior numbers when properly applied. The flight back to Bagram Air Base gave Raven time to process what had just occurred. Her fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty, but her mind was replaying every moment of the engagement with the detailed precision of a professional warrior conducting after-action analysis. She had fired 953 rounds of 30 ammunition, expended 2 Maverick missiles, and made 14 attack runs over hostile territory. Most importantly, she had kept 12 American soldiers alive until reinforcements arrived. But statistics couldn't capture the emotional weight of what she had witnessed, the desperation in Kane's voice, the professional calm of men preparing to die, the mathematical certainty that good people were about to be overwhelmed by superior numbers. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice. Ghost, this is Reaper 1-2. Package delivered successfully. 12 souls heading home for dinner tonight. Relief flooded through Raven's system like warm water. The SEALs were safe, extracted by helicopter after Morrison's guns had broken the Taliban's coordinated assault. 37 enemy combatants had been killed or wounded in the engagement, though several had managed to escape into the mountain's cave system. Outstanding work, Reaper 1-2. Those boys owe you dinner and drinks. Morrison's laugh carried through the static. Hell, Ghost, they owe you a lot more than that. You kept them alive with an empty gun and balls bigger than most pilots carry loaded weapons. The compliment was significant coming from Morrison, whose reputation for aggressive tactics was matched only by his skill in delivering precision fires in support of ground troops. Recognition from a peer meant more than any official commendation or medal ceremony. Bagram Air Base appeared on the horizon, its runway lights visible against the afternoon sky. Raven began her approach with the methodical precision that characterized all her flying, but her mind was already shifting to the inevitable debrief and paperwork that followed every combat mission. She had violated multiple regulations by remaining on station with an empty gun and low fuel. Her commanding officer would have questions, and some of those questions would be uncomfortable. But 12 American soldiers were alive because she had chosen courage over compliance, and that mathematics made the potential consequences acceptable. The A-10 touched down with the gentle precision that separated professional pilots from weekend warriors, its main gear kissing the runway with barely a chirp from the tires. As Raven taxied toward the flight line, she could see ground crews preparing for her arrival, their movements efficient and practiced. But something was different about their demeanor. Instead of the routine boredom that characterized most post-flight activities, the crew chiefs and technicians were watching her aircraft with obvious interest and excitement. Word of the morning's engagement had already reached the ground crews, and they understood that they were witnessing the return of a pilot who had just written her name in the squadron's history books. Captain Raven Ghost Blackthorn shut down her engines and completed her post-flight checklist with the same methodical precision that had kept 12 Americans alive over the Hindu Kush Mountains. But her heart was already beginning to process the emotional weight of what she had accomplished. The debrief took 4 hours and covered every aspect of the engagement in exhaustive detail. Colonel Patricia Hendricks, the squadron commander, sat across from Raven in the windowless conference room, her expression unreadable as she reviewed the mission reports and radio transcripts. Captain Blackthorne, you violated direct orders to return to base when Winchester. You remained on station with an empty gun and critically low fuel, endangering both yourself and a valuable aircraft. Hendrick's voice carried the flat tone of official disapproval, but her eyes told a different story. Yes, ma'am. I made the tactical decision that 12 American lives were worth the risk. The tactical decision, Hendrick's eyebrow raised slightly. Captain, you were ordered to RTB by a senior pilot. Instead, you chose to conduct unauthorized show of force passes over hostile territory. Raven met her commanding officer's gaze with steady confidence. Ma'am, with respect, those show-of-force passes kept Taliban fighters suppressed until Captain Morrison could arrive with a full weapons load. Without that suppression, the SEALs would have been overrun. The truth of that statement hung in the air like incense in a chapel. Everyone in the room understood that Raven's decision had saved lives, but military regulations existed for good reasons, and violations couldn't be ignored simply because they produced positive outcomes. Lieutenant Colonel James Martinez, the wing's operations officer, leaned forward in his chair. Captain, what would have happened if your aircraft had suffered mechanical failure during those unauthorized passes? We would have lost an A-10 and a pilot in addition to the 12 SEALs. Sir, the risk assessment was simple. 12 Americans were about to be overrun by superior numbers. The probability of mechanical failure was significantly lower than the certainty of friendly casualties without continued air support. Martinez nodded slowly. Combat veterans understood risk assessment in ways that peacetime officers sometimes struggled to grasp. In war, perfect solutions rarely existed. Commanders were forced to choose between bad options and hope their calculations were accurate. Colonel Hendricks closed the mission folder and studied Raven with the appraising gaze of a senior officer evaluating subordinate performance. Captain Blackthorne, your flying was exceptional and your tactical judgment was sound. However, your disregard for direct orders,